So here's my base, here's my first coil. I generally start off with just a plain coil first, but here's a little tip. If you want your base to be wider than what you cut out initially, you can take a coil and just wrap it around the outside and make it wider that way. If you want the coil pot to eventually get a little bit wider at the base and then come in, you can also think about attaching the coils kind of around the outside to make it wider. But for today, I'm just gonna do this like we practiced it and trim the tail and make the ends meet up and blend. Our clay today is fresh out of the bag and it's really wet. So we don't need to really use much besides our fingers to blend today. We also don't really have to worry about scoring and slipping today because we're just combining wet clay with wet clay. But on day 2 and day 3 of our build, we will need to score and slip because we'll be adding new clay to old clay. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So for today, I'm just going to use my finger. I'm going to blend those two pieces together so that they're permanently attached. And I'm going to have my hand on the outside. And I don't need this to be perfect. So this is actually good enough for today. Remember, I can perfect it when I get into that stage of the project, which will probably be next week. When I make a spiral, I make the coil a little bit skinnier at the top so that I can start curling it in on itself. So I just start wrapping like that, and then I can make it as tall as I want to. But when I'm finished, I trim the end, and then there's usually kind of like a nicer looking side. Sometimes one side gets kind of flattened and it's not as pretty. So I might think carefully about what side I want facing outward. I'm going to put it right on top. And then I blend. So here's the tricky part, is that I need to support this with my hand. So I'm pressing into my hand, and I'm going to take my thumb, and I'm going to blend that completely out because I also want this to be watertight. I don't want those cracks on the inside of the pot. So I'm blending that into the base piece. Okay, so that it's all those cracks have disappeared, like that. So that's looking pretty good. I can even cup it in my hand like this if it's easier, but I always want to be pressing into my hand so that I'm supporting that piece and it doesn't just fly off, okay? So that is how you make that piece. Now something that looks kind of like a rainbow, so same process. You have one end that's a little bit narrower. You start coiling it around like this on itself and trim the end. And then if I can press it together a little bit, then what I can do is cut this in half. And then I have two little pieces that look like a rainbow, and I could attach those, and in the same way. But now you're starting to see how important it is to make sure that your coils are really finger thickness, because I have enough clay to blend this piece into this piece without worrying about the sides getting so thin that they start breaking. So now if this were day 2 of my build, and this was clay that I started yesterday and I was adding fresh clay, I would need to score right here where I plan to attach. So I'm scratching into it, that's what scoring means. And then I take a little bit of water on my finger because I want the attachment to be like this, really, really strong. So then I press my piece on top of that. And I use my finger or I use a wooden tool. Either one, okay? It depends on how wet the clay really is. If it's super wet, you're better off using your finger. If not, you can use one of these rounded tools or even a spoon like you used with your practice piece. But the key is to get both pieces totally combined. Any new clay that you add to your piece must be blended by the end of the class period in order to be a permanent attachment. So here's what that looks like. I'm not going to worry about perfecting that right now because I know I can do it later. All right, so let me have a cool one. Same idea, but let me show you a little trick. So if you have a coil that's not looking so hot or it's starting to get cracked, if you take a water container and a sponge, a small sponge like this, and you squeeze out most of the water, you can use the sponge to take those imperfections out of your coil, like that. So if you've got a bunch that you've made, but they're not looking so great, I would recommend doing that. So to make the fence shape, you're going to bend, depending on how tall you want it to be, you're going to bend it in on itself, like that, and then flip it and bend it, and then flip it and bend it, kind of pressing them together, and then flip and bend, like that, and then press together, and then decide which side looks good, and then figure out where you're going to attach it. Maybe I'll attach it on this one because this one's already got some fence on it, so you can see what that's starting to look like. So maybe I'll go spiral fence on this one. Again, I'm going to score and slip to show you how that works. So where I plan to attach this, I scratch into the clay. I get a little bit of slip or a little bit of water on my finger, press it together, cup it in my hand so that I'm pressing against my hand, and blend. Okay, so you guys get the idea there. Let me show you one last thing, and that's how to make the rope. With a rope, you want 2 coils that are slightly thinner than you would normally make. And because you want the total thickness of this piece when you wrap it together to be finger thickness. So you're going to get your 2 skinny coils side by side, wipe them with some water, because you need them to stick together. And you need them to be really smooth. You don't want to try to smooth a coil on after you've gone to the trouble of making it into a shape and attaching it. It's a lot harder to do. It's way easier to smooth it in this stage. So I put these 2 pieces together. I start in the middle and I wrap one around the other and twist. And then I twist the other side while I hold on to this side. And now I have this cool little rope shape that I can add kind of like I did to the top of this piece.